Hey, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Eggman here with another video. Today we are going to be going over the Set 8 limited review for the blue cards this time. For those of you who don't know how I grade cards on this channel, for the limited reviews, I grade on a scale of 1 to 10. You can take a quick second to pause this video, kind of look it over, get a feel for what each individual number represents. Before I get into the actual cards themselves, though, I want to give a shout out to Alec Pastrana and Bearded Collectibles, the best shop owner on the planet. Beard has got you covered. Set 8 is less than 2 weeks away, I believe, at this point. Yeah, probably about 2 weeks at this point, 2 weeks from tomorrow. So get your pre-orders in for Set 8. Alec is going to give you guys the best prices on all of your sealed product. If you're not a fan of sealed product and you just want one copy of every card, he's got you covered with full play sets as well. So definitely check that out in the description below. So with that out of the way, let's jump right into the blue cards so we don't waste any time. Okay, so it's hard for me to talk about blue in general because, like we said in the last video, this is a set that's designed with constructed in mind. Blue is really weird because you can't even play most of the blue leaders, actually both of the blue leaders, without opening a very specific card. Thankfully, it is a common, but I question whether or not you would actually want to play it because unless your sealed pool is really good, the field spell in question, Android 21 scheme, will actually get you killed more often than not. So unless you are a seasoned player who knows what they are doing and you have a pretty solid pool, I would say somewhere between 9 and 10 clone token eaters in your actual sealed pool, so about 25% of your deck. So if 1 in 4 cards in your deck are token eaters, then by all means take Android 18 or my favorite, Android 21, and use them for your pre-releases and sealed events. Draft these leaders feel much better because it's easier to go into a specific archetype, because if it's open, you'll basically get all the cards that are open amongst 4 people at a table as opposed to 1. But yeah, if you do not open a really good seal pool for Android 18 or 21, I would avoid them at all costs. If you do open somewhere around like 9 to 10 or more token eaters or some of the bomb super rares that go with these cards, by all means, be my guest. I would not recommend using them again if you are not a seasoned limited player. I'm not going to give either of these, 2 girls a grade because it's just simply too hard to do so. More often than not, this score would be really low for most people. Most sealed pools, I could see them being, anywhere from like a 2 to a 5. I don't think you would want to do it. But they could be as high as a 9 if you actually have all the right pieces, because the system does work really well if you know what you are doing. So I'm going to, again, move past 18 and 21. Play them at your own risk. So first card is Kaioken Son Goku Strenuous Onslaught. 3 costs for a 15k is an okay rate. It does have the ability to take 2 life, and then it becomes a 20k, which is, again, pretty good for the rate. 3 costs, 20k is pretty solid. We'll play that for sure. And it does, again, give us a little bit of draw power, a little bit of self-awakening, which is always nice. The biggest knock against Goku is that he's at the uncommon level, so you're only going to really open maybe 1 or 2 of these. If this card was a common, I think I would give it a little bit of a higher rating. But as it is right now, it's a solid playable, so I will give it a 7. Next up is Son Goku the Rescuer. 3 cost 15k is, again, an okay rate, not great. But it is a solid pickup just because it does have the upside of somehow being able to play it for free with some of the other cards in the set, most notably Release Ball, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The big thing that Goku has going for it, though, is that if it, it is a solid body that you'll play, you might combo it away at some point, and when it ends up in your drop area, it is situational removal. Paying 1 to bounce a 3 or less, especially when there are still 3 cost 30ks in this format, is pretty good in my opinion. So for that reason, I will give Goku a high 7. I think that is a pretty solid inclusion for any blue-based deck that opens it. Next up is Supreme Technique Son Gohan. 2 cost 5k is a pretty terrible rate, and that would get you a 5. If you are an Android 18 or 21, though, the ability to have a 2 cost 20k critical on turn 2 is pretty backbreaking, and honestly, that's somewhere between an 8 and a 9 for me if you're in that archetype. But again, considering the drawbacks that come with playing that archetype and how difficult it is to open some kind of consistent engine in sealed specifically, again, draft is much better. It's really hard for that to actually be a thing most of the time. So it's, again, we're going to just assume that for most of these clone eating token cards, we're going to assume that you're an 18 or 21. I'll give you both grades, like I said, just, 5 if you're not in 21 and 8 if you are in a 21 base deck. Next up is Son Gohan calling for help. This is a top 5 searcher, so cantrips for 1 are always good. Luckily for us, there is a decent number of blue or green Gokus in the set. There's not like a ton of them, so it is possible to whiff, but some of the Gokus and Piccolos in the set are pretty good in general. You have a couple of Arrival cards, a couple Self-Awakening cards. You have the Bounce Goku that we previously talked about, and we even have some super rares that are pretty much amazing bombs that are game ending, so it's worth the risk of playing this 1-cost cantrip. So for that reason, I'm going to give Gohan a 7. Next up is Supreme Technique Vegeta. Surprise, it's basically the same thing as Gohan. It's a 20k double strike for 2, which is broken, or otherwise a 2-cost 10k, which is really terrible. So 5 if you're not in 21 scheme, and a 8 to 9 if you are in 21 scheme. Next up is Supreme Technique Krillin, It is a 2-cost 5k, and it's a blocker in a format where there is no negates. So as you guys already know, I value defense really high in limited, so that alone gets this card an 8 from me. It does have the added upside though, if you do have a pretty solid 18 pool, that you get a double striking, like a Champa, like a Further Destruction Champa effect, which is pretty solid, and it can end games. It doesn't really improve my rating too much. Just because you're in 18 doesn't make this card any less valuable. It's still just a really good pick, even if you are in any kind of blue base deck. You don't even have to be in a blue leader. If you're just on blue, just jam it just because it's a blocker in a set where there is literally no negates. Next up is another Krillin the Cunning. You guys have already seen this song and dance and show before. It's a cantrip for 1, so gets a 7. Next up is Master Roshi. Unfortunately, he's a rare, which does hurt him a little bit, but Master Roshi has some solid flexibility for dual color decks. You don't even have to be in blue. The ability to charge your multicolored bombs early on that you open, so that way you can smooth over the consistency of your deck and know that you have a Master Roshi somewhere in the deck to pick it up later on in the game, and then use it to win the game, makes him really nice. It's just really nice utility and flexibility. It'll smooth over your draws, your curve, and your decks throughout the tournament, and that makes me like Master Roshi quite a bit. Even if you're not in blue, I would give Master Roshi a high 7. I think it's a pretty solid inclusion in most decks that have at least 3 or 4 multicolored cards. Next page. Next up we have Speedy Substitution Android 18. So this is a 1-cost that will tutor you an android from the top 5, and in constructed, that's phenomenal. The problem is that most of the androids in the set are at the rare or higher level. There are a couple of uncommons. I don't believe there are any actual common androids in the set. It is just all higher rarity ones. So there is something to be said about a 1-drop that will dig for a bomb, because you're pretty much all of your hits off of this card are going to be bombs. So if you actually open quite a number of androids, it's a pretty sweet searcher, to be honest. Even if that's not the case, she does have an effect very similar to Master Roshi. If you're in a blue-green, you can charge your game-winning cards at some point early on, and then know that by the time you get through most of your deck, you will see your Speedy Substitution 18. You will be able to pick it up to end the game somewhere around turn 5 or turn 6, right around the time when it's time to wrap up the game. So for that reason, I will give Android 18 a 7, just because of the utility and the fact that it does get some bombs. It's really inconsistent compared to some of the other searchers, even more so than Gohan in this set, but it's worth taking the chance on playing the card. Next up is Android 21, the Ringleader. Again, if you are in an Android-based leader, this is basically a cantrip with upside or downside based on how you look at it. It has a double-edged sword effect. It gives your opponent a 10k token at the end of their turn. That means that you either get max value out of cards like Frieza and Cell, which we'll be talking about shortly, or you just gave your opponent another beat stick to kill you with. So again, yeah, double-edged sword. Not the best card, but again, it is a solid inclusion, I think, in most Android decks. It is a 7 in there. If you're not in 21 scheme, it's basically borderline unplayable. It's somewhere between like a 1 and a 2. Just avoid it at all costs. Next up is Maleficent Technique Frieza. 4 cost 15k is abysmal. What makes this card really good is the fact that you can trick it into play for free if you are in 21 Scheme. This is a common, by the way, so you should be opening roughly between 2 and 4 of these in 6 packs. So yeah, if you open, like 3 of this and the field spell, that's a pretty sure sign that you probably should take a chance on playing 21, assuming again you have a couple more token eaters in both blue and green. But yeah, Frieza does a lot of things for you. He comes down turn 1 and he can lay the beats on thick. You can use like a cantrip to eat your own field spells, Summoning Sickness, then drop Frieza on 1 and start getting in there for quick and easy damage. Again, limited, especially sealed pools, don't have much consistency when it comes to removal or beaters, so Frieza will get in for quite a nice amount of damage. He also is a pretty solid removal spell because he bounces most of the threats in the format. Most things are 3 cost or less, so you will out-tempo your opponent with a couple of these Friezas. If you open a lot of this Frieza, I would strongly consider going into 21 Scheme, and it is worth it. I would give Frieza an 8 in 21 Scheme. I think it is a high 8 at that. It's just the amount of tempo and pressure that he can create is just amazing. So yeah, definitely would recommend doing that. If you are not in 21 Scheme, he's like a 5, maybe even a 4, because paying 4 cost for 15k without any other keywords that bounces a lesser guy is like, it's not really what I'm looking for. Next up is Nappa, somewhere between a 4 and a 5. You guys know how this story goes with 1-drops. They're largely just energy filler that just can get in for 1 damage on turn 1. If you have nothing better to do, it's literally filler. Maleficent Technique Ginyu, super comboed. You guys, again, already know if you've seen these videos enough. We give those an 8 straight up always. Next up is Maleficent Technique Cell, very, very similar to Frieza. The thing is, he is a 4 cost 15k again. It's not really a good rate. I really don't want to pay that, but critical is just so powerful in limited that it's worth taking the gamble on him, even if you aren't in 21 Scheme and you are, you've got some kind of surplus of blue. So I will give Cell a 7 if you're not in 21 Scheme, just because blue has so few playables in this set. It feels like if you're not in 21 Scheme, that it's worth taking the chance of just being able to just drop this guy and just try and get there and play the long game and just crit your opponent out. So it is worth playing it there. Very similar to Frieza. He gets an 8 if you are in 21 Scheme, just because dropping this guy like turn 2 is like ridiculous. Even if you forego the draw, just being able to drop a 15 crit on turn 2 is just absolutely backbreaking for most archetypes. They just can't deal with that much crit pressure early. So the fact that you can play Cell for free and also play your actual 2-drop for the turn on curve is quite a lot of pressure, and I think a lot of decks will have trouble dealing with it. Again, the biggest problem with 21 Scheme is, I know based on pack distribution and rarity distribution, that this is all Magical Christmas Land, and sealed, it's not going to pan out that way unless you are just a really fortunate player that happened to open that sealed pool. 21 Scheme just feels like the biggest boom bust archetype that you can be playing in sealed. It's much better in draft, where you actually have some degree of control and you are pulling from basically 24 packs worth of cards as opposed to 6. Next up is Dr. Wheelo, Destruction Beam. Dr. Wheelo, Dr. Wheelo, however you want to say it. So yeah, 6 cost, 25k with blocker and no other relevant attacking keywords. I don't think that the auto will really help you in most cases. If you are in Dr. Wheelo, good for you. It does block 2 things in a format where there is no negate, so there is some upside there, but like, yeesh, 6 for, a blocker that's just there to not win, not lose you the game is like, it's just not good. I feel like I would give it a 6 for most players that are in blue. If you're in Dr. Wheelo, then it's probably closer to a 9 or a 10, simply because it just wins the game on the spot when you play it if you have the field spell. If you didn't have the field spell, I don't know why you wouldn't be in Wheelo anyway. So, speaking of Wheelo, Dr. Wheelo's Lab is the next one. We'll be talking about Dr. Wheelo when it comes to the green video. So yeah, battle cards can't be switched to rest mode, which is whatever. You can only use blue or green to place cards on it, whatever. Can't be removed, again, whatever. The big thing about this card is it's going to start and play for free because of your leader, and then it has the activate main to pay 2 to basically put a 4 cost or less underneath of this card. Yeah, so this is repeatable removal every turn, and it's not once per turn, so you can straight up just bury people with this card. Yeah, again, we always talk about how there's not so much consistency in limited, so playing a leader with a field spell that just gets to tuck guys for free, or should I say for 2 every turn, is pretty nutso. Honestly, I'll give Weirdo's Lab a 9 just based on that fact alone. If you aren't Dr. Weirdo, it's so strong. Granted, the only drawback to it and the only reason I don't think it's a 10 is because the 5 drops in the set are game ending, and this can't stop them. And then on top of that, you are actually losing a bit of tempo. Yes, you are taking away from your opponent, but you're not actually generating any pressure. Being able to play cheap guys, though, and just keep paying 2 every turn to remove their threats, if you just gas them out and they just don't have cards in hand, you might actually get there and win off of Weirdo's Lab, which is pretty nice. So I do think this is an archetype that is worth playing for. If you are in the blue-green color scheme, then this one is, I feel like it might be easier for a lot of players to accomplish your goals. You might actually win a lot more games playing for Weirdo's Lab in blue-green than playing for 21 scheme, which requires, I feel like, a little bit more skill and then also a lot more luck when it comes to opening cards. And last is 21 scheme, which we've been talking about basically this whole video at this point. It does give summoning sickness, which is pretty nice. The drawback is obviously that every turn you give your opponent 2 10Ks to attack you with, and if you do not have a surplus of ways to, get rid of your own tokens that you're giving them, you will get overrun and you will lose the game. You're basically giving your opponent the ammunition to kill you with. If they are on a leader that draws more cards than you somehow, say maybe Beerus, it does not bode well for you if you're trying to trade 1 card for 1 card, because they do not have to actually pay any energy whatsoever. You are giving them the attacker, so they can literally just spend all of their cards in their hand without actually having to spend mana on it to just try and grind you out. And then also there's the fact that your leader, if you're at 18, does not untap, so if you tap out, you're even more exposed. So yeah, there is a lot of good and a lot of bad with this card. 21 scheme is weird. It's like somewhere between like a 1. Obviously, if you are not in the 21 scheme leaders, like it's just a 1 straight up. But if you have the absolute nuts, it is an engine that will basically just overrun everybody and kill them. And there's not much your opponent can do about it. So in those scenarios, it's the 10. Just like I said with the leaders, it's really hard for me to just kind of grade these cards, appropriately. There's a lot of luck that comes involved, especially with your pre-releases and sealed when it comes to this card and the cards that surround it. If you get a critical mass, great. You have a functioning deck because it's like almost like a constructed deck or like a mini constructed deck, which doesn't happen often in sealed. It doesn't happen. So if you get something even close to resembling what a constructed deck should look like for 21 or 18, congratulations, you probably won your pre-release. If you didn't get it, run for the hills. Like it's not worth it. And you can basically use a Wheelo to fall back on. Okay, so the next card we're going to talk about is Bulma's Advice. Where to begin with this one? So you're basically getting 10k power across 2 turns. So 10k power is worth about 1 energy. Drawing a card without combo power attached to it is worth about half of a card or half an energy. So I'm getting roughly 1.5 energy worth of effect for 3. And it only works on my turn. And I'm probably tapping out for it because blue leaders don't tap in this set. And you start to see the problem. I think that Bulma's Advice is just a card that I would avoid unless you just don't have any other playables. At parity, where both players have similar hand sizes and similar boards, it's probably okay to resolve this card. Unfortunately, I don't like playing cards that only work well when I'm either ahead or at parity. I like cards that take control of the game and win the game. I do not think Bulma's Advice is one of those cards. So my advice would be to not really play it. So I'll give it a 4. And next up is Absolute Release Ball. So, for those of you guys who have played a little bit of Magic, you probably remember a card called Remand. Remand is a counter spell that comes down pretty early on in the game, and while it doesn't hard negate the card and the problem will come back later, it does give you some tempo advantage and a little bit of a minor advantage in the card draw. Absolute Release Ball technically can get you a card if you use its ability to take a life rather than pay its cost when you're low, and it does give you a little bit of advantage no matter what you do. Yes, it only targets 3 or less, but that's the majority of things in Limited. Absolute Release Ball, if you are in 21 or 18, is a pretty strong pickup in my opinion, and it's probably the best blue extra card in the set aside from the field spells. Like, there's not much competition between this and Bulma. But it is actually one of the stronger cards in general when it comes to extra cards in this entire set. I think it only really loses out to the green one, which we'll talk about in the next video. It's just a really, really strong extra card in general, and I would give it an 8, a high 8 at that. I think this is a really good card. Thank goodness this card is getting the SPR treatment, because foils of this card will be a nightmare once you guys realize how good this card is in Constructed. So yeah, there you go. We have one more final knock against this card. The fact that it's called Absolute Release Ball and yet the card art is excellent full course is a travesty. The super rare is not much better. So yeah, I'm really confused as to why they called this one Absolute Release Ball. But yeah, that's for another time. So with that out of the way, that is all of the mono blue cards. Join us next time when we talk about the mono green cards, and then obviously we'll be doing yellow, black, and then eventually the multicolor to try to finish everything up by next weekend for your pre-releases. So that is it from me, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you do, obviously consider giving us a subscribe if you're not already. Like the video, share it, ring the little bell, and then leave us a comment below to let us know what you guys are looking for outside of Limited videos. Are you looking for deck profiles? I know that Bulma and Kaioken Goku are coming soon from both SAP and Frisco, so you guys can expect those. I have a update to Clash of Fates Goku, which I'll try to drop sometime tomorrow on Friday, November 8th, 2019. So you guys can expect that at some point from me. I'm really excited about that deck profile. So yeah, that is going to be it for me, guys. Remember, as always, stay super. And as always, this channel is all about you.